connection? Yes, good. Good evening. Good afternoon. Sorry. Oh, good afternoon. Thank you. Right. Item number 1. Good afternoon. Welcome to Resources Scrutiny, Corporate Business Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'll get it right now. It's too hot in here. Number 1 on the agenda, attendance and apologies for absence. Where are we with this?
Apologies received from Councillor Seaborn and Councillor Haynes.
Right. That's it. So that's it at the moment. Right. Good. Thank you for that. Number 2, declarations of interest. I suggest as we, if you've got anything you think comes up, could you bring it up as it comes along? I don't think there is anything. I think remember what solicitor the lawyer said about that we're all covered for that as far as yeah. Item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting, 13th of May.
Chair, can I just add something there? Councillor Crick brought my attention a change of a word in the minutes. I've had a chat with Councillor Crick and it's been changed. And I'll be approved. If it's approved now, then it'll be changed after the meeting.
Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
The members wanted to know what that was and where it was.
We're totally intrigued, Councillor Crick.
They had implicated the system, and we changed it to they had applied the system.
Quite a significant word change. Thank you. Everybody happy with that? Good. And Councillor Crick's happy with that. Brilliant. Okay, we'll go back, just read through the minutes and see them for accuracy other than that one. So it's page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8 and page 9. I've sort of gone through that quickly. Have you got time to digest that lot? Would somebody like to move those minutes as accurate and correct now we've had that change? Thank you, Councillor Powell. And somebody second? Thank you, Councillor Powell. Lovely. Okay, we'll just go through those in a bit more depth to see if there's any matters arising. Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, action sheet. Over to yourself.
Thank you. Apologies, members. I haven't received the responses yet, but I know they are being progressed, and I will get those to you as soon as I have had them.
Acceptable. Can't go any further, can we? Item 5 on the agenda, update report, progress and impact of accepted recommendations.
Thank you. As you may remember, it was mentioned in the last council meeting when Tom and the chairs took the last annual scrutiny report that we would be looking to review our self-evaluation processes of scrutiny. And as part of that, we've got a report to look back on the recommendations that were made by this committee over the last year. We want you to not only look at where they've been accepted, but we need to look at how they've been implemented, progressed, and what impacts they have been. It's the first time we've done this report, so obviously you've only got the last 12 months of recommendations, so it may be that there is no impact to report as yet. We were due to have the Head of Strategic Services here to answer any questions, but unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he's not able to make it. He does send his apologies and offers that if you do have any questions or want to raise any issues, I can feed those back to him and he will get responses back to you.
Okay, what I suggest is we look through the report and where members have got observations, suggestions. We'll take about 5 to 10 minutes on this very quickly go through it and have any observations to be fed back. If by any chance we need to do that at the next scrutiny meeting.
Can't do it, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you. Right, the actual report itself, update report, progress and impact, accepted recommendations. Have a look at that report. Start with page 13, page 14.
Yes, if I may, Chair. In the conclusion, which is dealing with the recommendations, I mean, I find it good that under 5.3 we have expressed our concern that if recommendations have not been pushed forward, etc., then we should have an update. Because I'm amazed sometimes the reports go to Council about recommendations, and alongside you can see that some recommendations that were made months and months ago, not particularly with this committee, but are just sort of ongoing, and nothing has been done, in other words, in many cases. So we need to keep, it's all about tracking what's happening, isn't it? Not just making the recommendations in the first place, but tracking the outcomes.
Yeah, part of these pro formas now, they will go on year after year, so it may be that next year you've still got the 12 months beforehand, and these items won't drop off until you are happy that they've all been addressed.
I would like to add to that, because I noticed when we did the scrutiny report to Council last time round that there were some quite big bits of work that had not been commented on, where other bits that we hadn't had been commented on fairly quickly. And it worried me a bit that, that we hadn't had a reply back on it. Some of it was something we could respond fairly quickly on. So I think it's cogent that the response should be, if we're sitting in the scrutiny committee, we should get a fairly quick response on it, or maybe initial response, even if there comes the point of view of saying we need to go off and do further work and get back to you, later. Maybe that's something to look at.
Mm-hmm. That, I think it was a few years ago now that I was increasingly concerned that when we were getting, as an appendix, executive decisions made by chief officers for some very sort of, major service delivery areas, there was nothing to report month after month. And I said, this cannot be so. And it turned out then, when I asked for an explanation, I was told, the chief officer had delegated the decision-making to an assistant director. Well, that should have been put down. You can't sort of delegate and have it fall off the horizon or off the radar altogether. I think that has changed now, but we must be vigilant about the updates and tracking that we have.
The delegation is an outcome in its own right, isn't it? Mm. Thank you very much for that. Any more remarks? We seem to have generated a bit of discussion here, right? That's quite useful, thank you. Anybody else? Right, lovely. So we go on to the recommendations and have a quick look through that as well. That's Appendix 1. There's not numbers on it, but we start from what looks like page. Oh, there are numbers. Yes, I've just noticed them. Page 17.
Can I suggest that we need to keep this external funding thing on our radar? It appears that. Sorry. It appears that SRS don't have the time and the manpower to deal with it. I find that itself concerning, but I think we need to keep this on our radar, make sure that we have, we keep the pressure on SRS, if you like, in order to ensure that when they do have the time and the manpower, they work on this as, maybe not as a priority, but certainly, let's keep the pressure on them, because it is, it is important that members see this information.
Thank you for that. So page 17, we're back to impacts not available. So yes, your point made there. We need some idea of what the progress is there and who's doing it. I think that's a good point. Page 18, page 19. It's all empty, isn't it, this? Page 20, and there's a summary at the bottom there on page 20. Okay, page 21. and page 22. Any more comments on the SRS stuff?
Just to say,
So just to remind you as well, we've got vision in next week, so if you feel there's an item that you would urgently like to see back, you can raise that as well, and we can pop it on your work programme for the year ahead.
Is that's something you bring up next time? Right, thank you. Right, next item is page 22, which is channel shift, which was an interesting one to bring up when I did the report. So you notice impacts all the way through with this, which, you know, shows the value of this, to be quite honest. So page 23, page 24, page 25, the summary's interesting. I don't know whether people agree with that summary or not. Any comments on that? That's your lot. So we're now on to the main part of the agenda, which is what we're all sort of gearing up towards, which is the item number 6 on the agenda, which is any energy management. Gosh, did a segue there. Right, over to yourself. Yeah, invite everybody in. Right, I'll just we had a visiting session beforehand, and what we've got is the themes sheet, and if we just go through that, and what I'll suggest to people is they take some of the themes. Some people have got ideas already, and if you've got questions around the themes, please feel free to jump in as well. Good afternoon and welcome. If you'd like to sit down. Hello, Alan. If you'd like to introduce yourself and where you're from, etc. If you start from that end. Yeah, and have we got a spare mic? We've only got the one microphone there, have we? And then we've got two. Thank you. Yeah, just introduce who you are and where you're from.
Hi, I'm Paul Evans. I'm the Property Management Group Leader, so covering general maintenance, statutory testing around properties, and now energy management as well.
Steve Jarrett, Head of Highways, Transportation and Property, Property Maintenance Group, which incorporates energy management now, is within my portfolio.
Alan Jones, the Council's Energy Manager in Property, previously in Legal and Asset Management.
Dave James from Education Services and Resources team.
Right, thank you very much. I believe, Steve, you want to say something before we kick off?
Yeah, if I could, Chair, it's just to give the committee and yourself a bit of background on the energy management function within the authority and how it's changed in terms of where it sits within the authority. Previously, Alan sat in with asset management. Since February of this year, the energy management function has transferred over to us in Highways, Transportation and Property. There's a number of reasons for it, but clearly there's some synergies between the work that Alan does and the work that we do, both from a maintenance point of view with Paul Evans and a property construction point of view with our construction group led by John Lewis. So it was just purely to give you that background, Chair, into where energy management now sits. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to say thank you to Paul for arranging the visit the other day, because that was put flesh on the bones, as it were. It was really interesting and enabled us to sort of have some reality with the report and the questions that we've got to answer, which sort of neatly brings me into where we're going with this. And what we've got is 1, 2, 5 themes which members will sort of ask you, and it's nothing sort of untoward. I think we will have discussions on these, and they follow very much the report, and I'm sure you will answer these. You know, there'll be nothing much surprise, I suspect. Would you like to kick off, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for introducing yourselves. Really, just to set some of the parameters for us. Going through the report, we had some questions amongst ourselves which arose and which we felt we needed a bit of clarity on. We've picked up from page 31 that the policy was first introduced in 2004. Doesn't seem to have had an update as such for a policy since then, although the carbon management regime started in 2007, and you've had energy action reports, etc., being presented to Cabinet and Council in the intervening years. Can you perhaps explain to us why there hasn't been an update on the policy per se?
The reason why policy hasn't been updated since 2004, which was pre my actual starting time at Tollminers, I think, was because when I came into post, one of the things we were looking at was primarily housing, improving the housing stock at the time. And I spent a lot of time at that time working on insulation programmes and various things for housing. And I'll be doing small bits on the corporate estate. In 2007, that was just before the stock transfer, the focus was moved to the our own buildings, the corporate buildings. So the carbon management plan became the sort of the focus then for our strategy to look at reducing our carbon emissions in the corporate estate, in line with what was then Welsh Government strategies. For example, performance improvement grants at the time required us to look at our estate, and there was obviously financial finance attached to that for the council if we met the targets in our corporate estate. So that's why the carbon management plan sort of took that over. Then the carbon management plan then sort of sat in with then, which became sort of logical steps after that. We then had obviously the introduction in 2008 in preparation for 2010-11, the Carbon Reduction Energy Efficiency Scheme, which was brought in by the UK Government, which was initially going to be a cap and trade scheme, but became a straightforward payment scheme for us on that. We then used obviously the carbon management plan to give us a 5-year plan to 2012. And the last report from that carbon management plan for the action plan was given to Cabinet in 2012. And we've used that as the sort of the driving force. What we see now is that with changes again in future sort of EU legislation, UK government legislation, and things like the Future Generations Bill in Wales, of which carbon management and energy management are going to be a key strand of that on the reporting side. We think we need to look now at maybe revisiting the original policy, which included, for example, council housing and other aspects of which we have no responsibility over now.
Thank you, sir. So on that basis, we're going to have a new policy produced in the near future, presumably, as part of this revisiting?
I think, Chair, I wouldn't like to commit to it,
No.
but certainly within, since we've had the function of energy management is something we've been discussing about, the relevance and the need for a strategy. Some of the things that we look at now, for example, we're guided, as Alan mentioned, by others, the Welsh Government, National Government, or indeed Europe. So it might be that we have perhaps more of a light touch document referring to particular pointers, but certainly the need for some kind of strategic document is accepted, and that is something that we will look for. But it may not be a policy per se or a strategy per se.
Thank you for that. Can I just draw your attention to something else, which is on page 34, and this is to help us understand the web diagram at the bottom. We understand that Torfaen is functioning at 70% and is the third best functioning in Wales. and we're not quite sure how that ties in with this web. It either means the two authorities out of the remaining 21, it would be 22, are functioning at an extremely high level and pulling all the others with it, or this diagram doesn't make sense.
Right, if you look at the diagram, the difficulty is not in colour, so if it was in colour, you'd appreciate that if we look at the 12 o'clock node, carbon reduction strategy and target, where you see the line on the 8, that is Torvine's line.
Yes.
Right, the line on the inside is the Welsh average. And I just appreciate this was done a number of years ago now. So obviously there's been improvements made across. At that time, there were a number of authorities in Wales that did not have energy managers. So the function was shared or not even actually followed through. The result of that report at that time was to raise awareness of energy management in some of the lower authorities, in some of the authorities that were in the lower end of the scale. So they obviously got resources in management and whatever to improve their process. And the 70% comes from that that's where the third ranking was at 70%. Which Torvine was actually at that. There's two authorities above us. One was Flintshire, which is a very good energy management team and a large energy management team. And the other one was Caerphilly, again, which was a large energy management team of 6 with a lot of work done previous to that. So, okay.
Chair, does that explain it to you as well?
It certainly does. Any other members from the raised questions on this issue? Right. Steve.
Point we were talking in terms that a further policy report, whatever it is, will come our way. And you know me, I always like to have timescales when that's going to happen. So are we going to say in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months or 2 years? Because I think that when documents are expected, I think we're entitled to know when we should expect them because we will ask for them. So could you give us a clue?
I would also like to add that obviously Alan's mentioned the Future Generations and Wellbeing Bill, and I wonder what the statutory outcomes of that bill, if any, because that, to my mind, having been on the training sessions from a councillor point of view, I suspect there's some reporting on that.
I think to pick up the first question, we'd certainly like to see something within a year. I think that'd be a reasonable timescale to look back and reassess. I'm looking at Alan just to see in case he doesn't.
I'll add something to that if you want.
Yeah, no problems. Future Generations Bill, that's been, we're obviously involved in it, but it is a corporate lead being taken on that. So we will, as I understand, we will tie into whatever corporate approach needs.
The carbon aspect of that is obviously, Alan's intimated that the carbon reduction side of this particular exercise is obviously quite an important one. I'd be interested to see what your view is on that.
I'll pass out to Alan actually, but a particular element of that bill, be it carbon, we will continue to work on, and Alan will no doubt expand on that now.
As indicated, I say it's not about a year, but I attended a meeting yesterday afternoon with local partnerships and other to do with the Green Investment Fund that's being put forward by the Welsh Government from April 2016. There's going to be £500 million available on loan basis to public sector. Part of that we identified yesterday was a strategic view on what we as a council want to hang our hats on, really, as if we're going to look at utilising any of this fund or whatever. Is it going to be around energy efficiency? Is it going to be around vehicles? Is it going to be around housing? Is it going to be around large sort of energy projects? Is it going to be renewables? So we agreed yesterday that we were looking to do something within 6 months on getting a strategic sort of approach on what we would use to look, and I think that will inform then the sort of the strategy that Steve's talked about, which obviously once that's in place we can then use that to inform the wider strategy then.
What about the reporting back on the future generations? How are you going to gear up on that?
Currently, we don't know what the future generations reporting PA is going to be. Within the legislation, it states there will be a reporting for carbon emissions. Until we know what that is from the Welsh Government, we can't really. But I would say with what data we already recover across the whole authority, and talking about our own, obviously, building stock here, we present that in a number of different formats to various bodies in the way of building energy certificates, in the way of consumption data, and we've done that historically for the last sort of 7 or 8 years. So we think we've got enough data available, and we've got a good management system, software system that we collect the data in. And things like we've done in the past of centralising billing into one place has really assisted that, because previously it was very difficult to sometimes get data from individual sites who, for whatever reason, didn't have it to hand. Whereas now it comes in centrally to my team, and we process it from there.
Which nicely leads us on to the more specific questions that we've got on there. Could somebody kick off on these themes?
Yeah, if I start. We've got, how is the cost effectiveness of a new measure assessed? And I particularly like to ask this one, because on the site visit, we went to Crown Bridge, and we were just looking at the water harvesting system. And there were some queries there about whether actually it was saving any money because of the energy it used to pump the water, and also whether it was making any savings environmentally, because obviously, you know, you were saving on water, but you were using more energy. So, yeah, how are you assessing it, and are we just doing things for the credentials rather than because it's making savings?
Well, any energy or project or whatever project we look at, we always do a cost-benefit analysis, usually on a payback basis, or if it's something a bit more in depth, we will look at what's known as a net present value report, which obviously looks at a longer term effect and payback, because you take into consideration then other parameters that are outside of a simple payback process. As for things like grey water harvesting, that is easily calculable, because we know from national benchmarks across Wales that we've developed with myself and my colleagues over a number of years, what the average consumption per pupil per annum is, and so we can use that data to benchmark each school to see who's using more water or less water, how many pupils are there, what they've got there, why is that school performing better than that one. We also use it to identify if there's potential issues with leaks, etc. there. So we've got a number of tools that we can use to on the specific one at Crown Bridge, it was something I wasn't aware of, but I'm made aware of, and so things we have done it with rainwater harvesting in other buildings.
Could I just add, in regard to that, so new school buildings, there are requirements from Welsh Government around funding to hit certain BREEAM targets, and that gets factored into the whole process of the new school building when they're looking at what energy saving measures and water saving measures we've got within there, and sometimes it's to meet offsets against other targets. Yeah, so it's assessed by our construction team and designers on that basis.
Okay.
If I can just come in there, Crown Bridge is obviously in many ways a special case. Do you think when things go wrong that perhaps we need to be much more careful about making sure that whatever action is needed to put it right takes place very quickly?
when you suggest things going wrong, sort of around the rainwater harvesting in particular, is it? Okay, I think yeah, there's been a lot of learning around the schools, and this is some of the restructure that's happened has been from that learning, is ensuring that we've got the right parties working in the right areas so that we can make those decisions quickly and get the problems fixed as quick as possible. We've recognised with our schools that there has been some handover processes that haven't gone as smoothly as maybe they could have done. And certainly around the new schools and the ones that we're building now, we're consciously active in liaising with Alan, myself and the construction team to make sure we're all clear on what's going on, and the site management so that they understand the processes as well. Because we can get tied down sometimes in the nitty-gritty of who's responsible for what around the table rather than just sorting out the problem. So I think, yeah, you are quite right. We need to deal with these quicker and much more efficiently. And I think we've gone some way into doing that now.
So do we know now when it's going to be fixed at that particular school?
I understand it is on in the pipeline to be fixed. And the issue we've got at the moment is that the parts are being sourced. And as soon as the parts are being sourced, it will be fixed. But we found that the actual parts for this equipment differ slightly to the general standard parts we can obtain. There's nothing much we can do about that now. We've got to live with it. But we've got to do the best we can to get this done as soon as possible, which my officers are working on doing now.
Any more? Go on, then.
Just to say, I mean, with a lot of these, you said that it's finding out who's responsible rather than getting it fixed. I mean, one of the issues that I find around that is who's paying for it, really. And that does tend to do the rounds if you can't actually pin down who is responsible. But with this, surely it can't be that difficult because there is a payback. So I would have thought that it was much easier to pin down who is responsible, really, and to get it fixed quickly.
I think from a point of view of using our resources as wisely as we possibly can, if we get something like this happen in one of the schools, the first thing we do is look to the original contractor or designer, and that's only right to go down that route in the first instance to see if there is any redress to what they have done there, rather than to be using our resources to repair things that they should have put right in the first place. And I think that's happened in this case. But we've got, and that's the type of thing that does the rounds as well. You know, you're quite right. Who's going to be funding it? Who's responsible for it? But certainly, going forward on the new schools, we are working much harder on having this improved handover process so that everybody understands what's in the building, what's in the contract, and who's responsible for what.
So, Jack, can I just add to that?
Yeah, sorry.
In the 3 schools that we currently in the process now of building, we have worked with the contractor now, that's the new design and build contractor, Wilmot Dixon, and we're working with their energy team and their maintenance team, and we will be in those schools for the first year with the contractor, making sure that all these little things now are teased out. It's lessons we have learned from the past. We can't go back where we were, but we've learned that we do need to look at this a bit more as an approach, because we need to get these sort of things ironed out in that first year of operation. So we know whose responsibility is then from that.
Yes, I was just saying the point. It's a bit worrying that we've built a new school, and it is new, and we've got a part which is not working, and we can't get a replacement for it. That, for me, is extremely worrying. Who designed it to start with? Do we know that? Why is something which is new not working?
Really, the detail of that is with our construction team. I wouldn't understand the full detail, but obviously this was a school that was built under the former framework that was with Kia Western, and it would have been a design and build job with them, with working closely with our project managers. Yeah, from a maintenance point of view, that's my bag maintenance. I'm just as worried as well, but we have to try and deal with these things. It's not the the only one we've got, but we are learning, and a process that we're going through now with the new schools is ensuring that we are not simply putting things in to win points, but that we are looking at these schools and saying, how are they going to be used in operation? Are they too sophisticated? You know, have we got a nice standard school that's quite basic and easy to use? Because a lot of the savings that we make is in the use of the building rather than in the build. So that is a process that we're going through now quite heavily with our new contractors and our construction team.
To move away possibly from schools at the moment, and I have some questions about other property assets that we have, namely community halls. Now, although there are some community halls that are quite independent and not owned by Torfaen, I'm a trustee of one, there are others that are either leased or have a management agreement, and once again, I'm secretary of one of those. And it came to my notice, thanks to help from Alan and Jackie Rue, that in the one we could actually save possibly £2,000 a year in energy costs by having one supplier instead of the traditional 2 suppliers. Now, my question is, with all those community halls, we could also save a lot of money if we replace the boiler. Now, they are actually the property of Torfaen County Borough Council. We need to know what grants we can have, how you can help replace, because most of these community halls have a small but very loyal committee that are, really trying to handle a diminishing budget to maintain services from the hall, etc. I think we need some joined-up thinking there. So all halls, I've asked Jackie Rue possibly to get a briefing note out, are aware where the savings can be made with energy, because it is the biggest bill at the moment for most of those halls, and that we can learn from the experiences of each other, because at the end of the day it is still Torfaen property, and these are volunteers trying to balance the budget and finding themselves sometimes in difficulty because they need a new boiler, etc., and that's not forthcoming, or they're not aware of some of the issues that I've already stated. So in other words, what can the 3 of you do to help those struggling community halls, because they're providing a marvellous asset, running luncheon clubs, all kinds of activities for vulnerable people, one of them, several of them in communities first areas. But we do need that kind of expertise and advice to help.
I think you've answered the question in asking it. I think the ideal thing to do there would be for us to work with Jackie Rue and to get some form of briefing note out to the community halls. She's a direct contact. We will have some contacts, but we won't have them all. And then we can offer any advice that we can, bearing in mind that we can only go so far in offering advice, and we can assist, and as a council we will assist. But we've also got competing priorities from a limited energy management team as well.
Could I bring us back, not necessarily to education, but to the visits, because 2 of the things that came out of the visits, I will ask this question. Identified new equipment, it's back to the previous question in one way, but not another. Identify where new equipment has been installed, how areas and working on parts can be replaced. But as we've moved on to newer technologies, and one of the questions we did in the pre-scrutiny was the whole business about novel technology. I know Alan's got very strong views on this subject, and you hinted on novel technology as opposed to tried and tested technology. And then the other part of it is about control systems. And we raised the issue of working with SRS, develop IT system for reporting faults, who benefits this, and obviously the reporting system to your chaps or to the people that installed it. And I mean, you raised some very interesting points there. What's your response to this? Because you've obviously just must have thought quite a bit through this already.
Yeah, we have. I think with the limited resources we get these days, we try to do the most we can with them. At the moment, our energy team consists of Alan from the expert advice, but we can now, with the restructure, pull on the services of our principal building services engineer that we met on site. Now, certainly what we'd like to be able to do is have more control, remote control from our own department and from our own office, so we can view these issues and find out exactly what is going on with the systems. What we're looking at the moment around that is working with SRS around the new school buildings that's happening and talking to them about providing us with single server point that this system can be hosted on, and all the data and information that transfers between the sites and our unit would come directly from that one hub then, if you like. But it's early days because we're only just in the process of working up the design for the new schools. And I think that showed where we've learned from the past, in that where we built the new schools and we've put these systems in, and the connection has never been made back to our technical officers. Now we're working at design stage to say, right, how are we going to do this? Let's speak to SRS. Can you facilitate it for us? And where can we go with that? So that we end up with a function that not only the site manager can view, but we can view back in the office. We can see, if it's a simple thing that somebody's just altered the controls wrong, or if there is something technical like a pump gone and we need to send an engineer out. So we're working with SRS on it. We're hoping to have a meeting with Steve Jeans in the near future about what we can manage from it, so that we can get not only the new schools connected up, but then maybe possibly look at a project of getting all the schools that have this technology connected up to us as well, and other buildings that have it. It's not just schools, actually.
The other question, the sort of one that I see, what is the best of technology to go into all these new schools now? Because I've seen a range of stuff here. I mean, I've seen ground source pumps. You've listed it here. I won't go into the whole lot of it. I mean, have you got a suite of stuff that you could put into all the schools, maybe even the community halls that Mary's mentioned, that you think would work, function, and not get sort of mucked up too much?
I think from my point of view, I'll let you answer this, Al, I think, but just from my point of view, it's a bit of horses for courses, isn't it? Making sure we're putting the right things in the right places. Like you saw at the Manor, that air source heat pump was the ideal scenario for the Manor. That wouldn't work generally on the rest of our buildings. So for me, it's an appraisal of each site, a proper appraisal of each site, to make sure we're putting the right new technology in. Yeah, but I'm sure Alan will explain.
Yeah, for example, with the new schools, we had a feasibility study done on all the relevant technologies that could potentially go into that building. And then we evaluate each of those technologies among cost, carbon savings, lifetime carbon savings, future maintenance costs. So we do a whole life costing to make sure that we pick the appropriate, because as Chair knows, I'm not one for wanting to put what I call green bling on every building. I think there's lots of things we could do within the existing estate, which would reduce our carbon emissions without actually going down that route to start with. And then once we've done that, then go to the extra that we can do to reduce emissions further. Because replacing existing consumption with consumption from a green source isn't reducing consumption. And so that's, my ethos. But we use the feasibility study to look at what we can do. For example, we've looked in the 3 new schools, and there's likely to be photovoltaic panels on the roofs of the schools. There's likely to be LED lighting within the schools to reduce the lighting demand, because in most schools, lighting accounts for 40 to 50% of their energy consumption. So if we can reduce that to 20-25%, that's a big saving long term. From a maintenance point of view, LED lighting has got 40,000 hours lamp life compared to 8,000 hours on a normal fluorescent. So again, there's maintenance savings in the future. That allows that maintenance money to be allocated to more pressing things then. To go back to your point, Councillor Barnett, it allows other resource to be used elsewhere then. So that's how we look at it now. We did it in the past, but not as in depth as we would have liked.
Members, you want to raise a point? Jessica?
Another question around this was about, we brought up in pre-agenda around training. We've touched on it, talking about handovers now with new buildings, so staff will be trained. But what capacity do we have then if there's staff change? I mean, like we're talking about the manor, for example, where it went from council to, a private contractor in there. Do we have the capacity to train up people in these systems? Because obviously if somebody starts tinkering with it, you can have big problems.
We have our mechanical and electrical team who tend to be the guys that will go out and give instruction rather than training. Formal caretaker training was carried out a number of years ago around most of the school buildings, but certainly when you come to a non-school site, there's not we do a premises manager training, but that doesn't really cover use of the equipment and facilities that's in there. So the best thing we offer at the moment really is one of our engineers going out and talking people through the systems.
With regard to training, thinking of the staff who act as bursars in the schools particularly, how alive are they to the problems and the differentiation that they can get with the different systems? Do they appreciate where savings are perhaps not savings, where there's been a spike for some reason, and whether there's a real reason for that? Have they been given any instructions as to how to look out for that when their bills come in?
Again, a few years ago, in partnership with the Education Department, we did run some training for bursars and school caretakers on energy efficiency. And from obviously the report, you'll see that we run a similar sort of exercise last year with 10 schools, but engaging with the pupils as well. And the pupils we found were very proactive in taking these things on board. Again, from my own experience, we have a lot of bursars and school clerks who are pretty switched on when something's a little bit extra. They look at, for example, we pay all their bills centrally, but they still monitor, obviously, their costs. And I had a question the other day from a school about increased water use. They picked it up as increased water use, but I was able to demonstrate to them why there was increased water use, and they were quite happy with that. It's because there's been increased pupil numbers on the roll, and that makes a difference to water, whereas you wouldn't see it in heating. For example, heating gas, because you're heating a building volume, whereas water is person dependent, and that's driven by a number of people. So there's these things that they're aware of and things like that.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to say actually that obviously, Alan's done a lot of work with our schools over the years, and we've tried as far as possible to engage with bursars and with our head teachers in terms of energy efficiency savings and savings generally within the budget. Obviously, energy is one of the, should we say, targets that you can make a saving in within our schools. What we've done relatively recently is engaged with the schools forum and suggested, and they've agreed, that we perhaps appoint an energy efficiency officer within the education service, because obviously we realise that Alan is basically a sole person, and there's difficulties with actually getting out to schools and actually engaging with schools on time and doing things such as training and just general awareness of energy efficiency issues. So what we're proposing is to actually appoint somebody on a fairly short-term basis, 3 years, and that will be funded hopefully by savings from actually the reductions that will be made within the energy areas. So that's the proposal that is on the table from ourselves, and obviously we'll work with Alan and with Paul and Steve in order to actually marry the two roles together, but the role itself will be based in education and will be school specific.
Yes, I mean, can I pay tribute as well to the trade unions, school-based trade unions, both teaching and non-teaching, certainly in my experience in the past. They have been exemplary in encouraging members to go on the training courses, to implement what's been heard and learnt, particularly with school janitors, etc. And I'm sure that sort of relationship is continuing, and their officers have put a lot of time and energy into working with, you know, TCB officers like yourself on those training needs.
Thank you, Mary. Any more on that then?
Could I ask, I mean, we all know that capital is becoming much more difficult to get hold of, and that the Welsh Government is being far more stringent in the ways in which it issues capital, and are demanding more and more value for money. Do you think that that will affect how energy efficient any future new builds are likely to be?
Yeah, we're all looking at each other and who's going to answer, I think, that quickly.
We've got something on further on this.
I think the issue, Glenn, is, yes, obviously what's happening is that money's getting tighter and tighter all the time, as we all know. I think one of the issues really for us is to ensure that our resources are targeted on what's really needed. So when we talk about a new build, then obviously the real purpose of the building is to house, in the case of ourselves, schools, and ensure that pupils and staff within those schools have an effective place in which to work. Obviously, you know, with the help of the property services team, etc., then obviously we would hope that we can actually implement savings in terms of energy efficiency or whatever else it may be. But yes, I think the difficulty is that we've got a really tough budget round coming.
Could I also add another question there, because obviously a lot of us are school governors, and the part of the education programme now is environment and sustainability, and part of the as Alan's already hinted, some of the best ambassadors, champions, are school children themselves. And you obviously that's part of the education programme.
Yes, Chair. It's quite evident from the sort of anecdotal evidence that I have that school pupils in particular are extremely interested in green issues, should we call them, for want of a better terminology. And if we can actually target individual school pupils, it's surprising what sort of influence they can have on the actual running of the school. Obviously, with the school councils, etc., you know, there is a bit of a pressure group there, shall we say, in order to, you know, look forward and see what we can do with actually reducing energy, water costs, whatever else it may be, turning lights off.
That might be one of our recommendations, I suspect. Is nice one. Right. Can I, any more members, any more, can we put on to theme 2, if we may? Somebody come in with theme 2. I think we've done that nicely, thank you there. On theme 2, which is partnerships.
Thank you. We've sort of looked at this from several areas of consideration, and one in particular that we feel we need to know more about and have an overview of is CLAW, C-L-A-W, and how it operates and what the value is actually gained through this partnership.
Right, the Consultant of Local Authorities Wales is an organisation contributed to by the 22 local authorities, 2 police services and 1 fire service. We meet under various regimes. For example, I'm part of the energy management group and has been a past chair of that group. Paul meets under the building services group. We have engineers that meet under the mechanical and electrical engineering umbrella, and we also have property staff, for example, Rob Flower and others who meet under another sort of umbrella of that. And the idea is not to reinvent the wheel across Wales. We had a little lobby group as well for ourselves, local authorities. For example, we do have membership of the Welsh Government estates now, whereas in the past they didn't decline, but we've got them on board. So now we've got a sort of a feeder line into the Welsh Government as well for their estates process. And we look to provide information to each other, assist each other through knowledge sharing, through practical works that maybe one authority has done, another authority hasn't done. If an authority is, for example, looking at a technology, and could be a new technology, a novel technology. Should you just call it a black box for now? Then one authority might look at that, and that authority will then produce an in-depth report on its performance, its potential, and any savings and costs. And then we share that amongst each other to ensure that that we all benefit from that. We also look to work, for example, we've got a formal partnership with the Carbon Trust, with Resource Efficiency Wales, again, so that we can make sure that we're finding out what's happening before it comes to us, with WLGA as a member on our team as well, so that we know what's coming and we can get ahead of the game if we can. For example, under performance indicators, we know that a new Welsh Government performance indicator is going to be around building energy certificates. Last year, we started to collect the data for that across Wales and share that data. So we're ahead of that and know that we can look at that and it's meaningful data. So it's a group across all types of genre in the property and engineering side, and that's what we do with that.
That sounds extremely useful as a body. When it comes to developing a framework of supply and installation, are you closely linked with that as well?
Yes, we do. We have CLAW specifications, which are used by most CLAW members. For example, we have a CLAW electrical specification, a CLAW M&E specification, and individual members from the individual authorities will work in smaller groups to develop those specifications. And then the rest of the group will utilise those specifications if it slots in with their needs. We also looked at, for example, procurement issues. And in fact, we're working with the National Procurement Service now on a procurement process for photovoltaic and other renewable equipment.
Any more questions on this one? Right, next theme which we've touched on is investment and funding. Who wants to kick off on that one? Glenn, your usual sort of area. Sorry.
Well, I mean, yeah, basically, talk about the loans, the loan funds provided by the Carbon Trust and the Welsh Government. I mean, are these likely to diminish?
The answer is yes. and for a number of reasons. Obviously, capital has become tight. I mentioned at the very beginning that the Welsh Government are looking at the Green Investment Fund, £500 million. Well, that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And potentially it could be the demise of the Seals Fund. I don't know that for definite at the moment, but it's ideas like that. With the SALEX funding, that is comes from national government, UK government. It's originally done on a basis that we were charged a tax on our energy bills called a climate change levy. As a private body, as a private company, you can get that money back through the use of enhanced capital allowances, whereas public sector bodies cannot have enhanced capital allowances. So therefore, we were given this SALEX loan funding as a way of recovering some of that funding. But if we do not use that funding, and that funding stays dormant for a period, there are other bodies who could use that funding. So obviously the SALEX board then will look, for example, I'll give you an example, Blaenau Gwent lost their funding 3 years ago for not using it, and Caerphilly Council took it on and have been using it. So if you don't use it, you lose it, and if the potential is, with the way as we are all being squeezed on budgets, it could go another way.
You finished on that, Glenn? I was going to ask a question here because we're obviously building 11 more schools around here at the moment. Do we actually do cost-benefit analysis and put in these type of systems any rate? I know without grant, or do we have to have grant to put them in? Is that what you would do? When we put brand new systems in?
Are we talking new build schools, or are we talking... New build schools and the whole life thing, which I saw a demonstration on in Cardiff last year. Yeah. New build schools, obviously there's a match funding provided by Welsh Government for our 21st Century Schools programme. there'll be a number of factors that determine us getting a successful outcome to our bid for 21st century funding. I don't know if perhaps I can get helped out by others from the table here, but we certainly will have to look at the costs of provision of systems, because that's will be included in the business case. Whether we have to pick up whole life costings as part of that, I'm not quite sure. I would anticipate the running costs of the school being included in the bid, but perhaps that's on to
Yeah, certainly, Chair. There is, obviously, when we go to build a new school and we ask for capital monies, then there is a process that we need to follow, which involves quite in-depth analysis of the costs and the benefits of each individual build, and that will include reference to energy efficiency as well. As we mentioned before, the BREEAM standards itself within the actual builds will touch on the fact that you need to look at the type of installation within the school in order to hit the actual standard, if I remember correctly. So yes, basically there would be some sort of cost-benefit analysis.
Could I add, because perhaps the officers are too modest to say, that we have received BREEAM awards for what has been happening with our programme with building new schools, Blenavon in particular, and to a certain extent Crownbridge. So a lot of that hard preparatory work is being recognised.
I haven't seen the plans for some of the new schools that are being proposed. I mean, you obviously put a lot of work into that, partly because it has to be in the standards now anyway, but I would hope that all this stuff was in there anyway. It makes a lot of sense. And but it comes back to the previous discussion we had, what you put in there and what you don't put in there. Back to your view about practical, well, both of you, practical stuff that works. And obviously part of the practical outcome is sensible heating arrangements and the carbon stuff together. It's got to be there. I mean, that's how you do it.
Just make a quick comment. I mean, we can see by the use of the test ones you did around the schools, how the actual operation of the building can save a lot of money. And if we do go in putting in too much technical stuff, people don't understand it, they don't know how to use it, and therefore we're not able to make those savings and keep those carbon reductions down. So, oh yeah, of course, yeah, it would be. So it's looking at those ones that we've learned over the past are working, and the ones that maybe are the bit of green bling that Aaron refers to, rather than actually a practical solution. Yeah. And that's what's being done now in the new schools.
To make you aware, if you want to look at a figure, in a building over its lifetime, 1% is the capital cost of building it. 99% is its cost in its lifetime operation. So you can see why operation and maintenance are big chunks of building costs. So that's where we do try to target a lot more in that area if we can.
A figure I've never seen is actually, you took a whole life. What would a modern school? How long would a modern school last for? Is that? No. I've never seen that put down from there.
I wouldn't. You're asking the wrong person. I think you'd have to go to our design team. But if you take what we usually forecast on the life of a building, you'll notice that there's a hell of a lot of buildings within Torvine that are way past the life expectancy that we would have put to them anyway, so it's very difficult to give some idea. However, what I understand is, and I haven't seen it yet, is that our designers at the moment are working on whole life costings for these new schools. So we will have a picture of how it should pan out then, if you like.
Well, the reason I asked that question about whole life, that question about how long your school lasts, or how long is, because obviously if you've got whole life expectancy, the demolition of the building is as important as the building of the building. And having sat through a few of these things, various things in Cardiff, it starts to get a rather pertinent question, because the energy use at the end of the building, taking it down, is just as important. I mean, you just have to watch the town centre when they took Astor, the old Sainsbury's building down, and that becomes an important issue in construction, doesn't it?
Authorities, of course, it could be listed buildings as well, which is why Eton is still going strong.
Can I come back to this capital bill then? I mean, we are talking about restrictions on capital bill. So what exactly are we building? I picked up this on an article I read the other day about the criticism of Gove schools in England. I did ask, and apparently we don't build them the same way. But it does concern me that with this tight squeeze on capital costing, we are building these. Okay, we've got to build them to a standard, and we've got to. But are we building them to that basic standard, or are we building them to? Are we to some degree future-proofing them, or are we failing to do that because we don't have enough money, capital?
We have to build them. It's only relatively recently that schools have come under building control. Previously, they weren't in the building control regime. So we have to build them to the building control standards. Now, building control standards are improving relatively short periods. The next building control change in Wales is in 2 years' time. That would then increase, obviously, the parameters that we have to build to. And the eventual aim of the Welsh Government is to get to zero carbon in new buildings in Wales. Right? So therefore you can see that the building control aspect is taking that over. What comes out of that is that you find that the higher the standard you build, there is a cost penalty. And if the sort of areas of example, I'll give an example of if you look at what was the code for homes, code 345. If you went from code 3 to 4, it was around about £7,000 a home build cost. If you went then from 4 to 5, it went up to £20,000 per home build cost. And that's in a small built form, if you think about it. If you replicated that across a larger municipal building, that'd be quite a substantial capital sum. And that can then delay the programmes that obviously David says that we need those schools to be able to teach the pupils in a safe and accurate environment. So it can affect it, yes.
Any more?
I think in terms of the costs referring to new schools, particularly in 21st Century Schools programme, it's fair to say that, you know, not just in Wales but across the country, lots of buildings have been built as exemplar buildings, which possibly in these more austere times nationally are perhaps not the buildings that we should be looking to design and build now. It's certainly clear the Welsh Government are looking at the costs of the 21st Century Schools programme, and that's a piece of work they are actively looking at the moment, with a view to getting towards perhaps almost a standard cost per square metre. Now, whether they ever achieve that, we're not quite sure, but it is an interesting piece of research, because, you know, if you take some people say of the argument, you know, we're designing 22 different schools in 22 different authorities. Now, whether that actually is the case or not, this research will show. But yeah, certainly there will be, I think, more restriction on what we build, and make sure that whilst Welsh Government are not saying, you know, they want standard buildings, you know, replicated across Wales for the 21st Century School programme, I think they will be looking more closely at the cost per metre, and asking questions about why one school might be 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, 8 times the cost of the cheapest school.
Thank you. Any more for this? No. Should we go on to theme 4 then? Who wants to areas of improvement? Who wants to kick off on that one? Anybody want? Someone? Go on, Veronica.
We're considering here the recommendations from the Carbon Trust Wales report, and we've got a whole series of questions. Perhaps if I give you the first 2, and then other people can come round and add on the others. How confident are we that we're getting good quality data and automating it so that we'll have historical records? How do we measure carbon management and inform people? So they're the first 2 questions.
Take the first one. Are we getting good quality data and automating it? 96% of our estate is now covered by automatic meter readings. That means we read the meter live at site remotely by a number of communication systems, primarily mobile phone technology. That is on gas and electricity. On water, we have got 30 schools now on a automatic meter system whereby we can view schools' water data with a 15-minute delay. So we can see 15 minutes ago what water they were using. We collect that into an energy management software system that we use, and from that we can produce a number of reports on consumption, exception being that will show us if there is an issue we need to be aware of. In an ideal world, I would like to be able to look at that data on a daily basis, but I can't. So some things will slip a little while before they're noticed, and that's because of the resource issue I am. But we're confident we're collecting the data. We're confident we've got that data. It's historical data. So we can go back. In fact, on some sites in the borough now, we've got 5 years' worth of metering data for every half hour throughout the life of that building. So, you know, and it does pay dividends because we use that data to look at, for example, electricity profiles, which allows me to consider changing a tariff on a site. A simple example is by writing a letter to Western Power Distribution, I reduced the nominated supply capacity charges for the SRS by £24,000 by being able to look at that data and say, well, actually, we're not using that capacity that they say we have to pay for. So I went back to them and they agreed, and it was just a simple process that way, and that's how we use the data. We use it to identify faults. So the data is there and we do use it, and we do store it, and it's there available.
When you say you've got it for identifying faults, but you also said you couldn't look at it every day, is there some means by which those faults are identified and brought to you immediately?
On the water system, we're in the process of developing a exception report, which could, if we, depend on which view we take, can actually email or text a person. For example, in the SRS, we've got this system on most of the plant in the SRS there. So if an air conditioning unit, for example, failed, it texts and emails relevant people so that you can respond straight away. So we're looking to use a similar type of approach to do that. But again, this takes time and takes money, because these things are not free add-ons to various things. So it's developing that. And example, I've got some capital money this year to do the next tranche of water metering across the corporate estate, which will look at possibly some of this alarming process that we require.
Thank you for that. You've talked about the barriers of time and money, and obviously schools and certain other service areas will take priority for the obvious reasons. What about the rest of the estate then? Libraries, our own civic hubs, social services hubs, adult education centres, etc. I mean, you've only got to look heavenwards, and I'm no electrician, but this is really overkill with the lighting that we've got in here today, for example. So how far down the chain are you going to go with that kind of very important advice?
Take your point about the lighting. 4 months ago, I replaced all the lights in here, right, with LED lighting. Right? It's now using 75% less electricity than it did 4 months ago. And in fact, across the whole of the building, you'll see there's a lot of LED lighting have gone into this building in the last, since Christmas. We've implemented that in other areas, for example, landlords' areas of buildings, of managed buildings we have, for example, some of the Torvine business centres, because we pay the bill there. And, you know, we've reduced that bill by investing and looking at For example, lighting is something that we can control. We can't control parts of the building that the tenants use, but we can control parts that we manage. So we've looked at that. Social care, we worked with them when they moved offices in Cwmbran from the social care office where TIPS were into one of our buildings. Again, we offered them an opportunity that they could have a building with lighting as it was and functional, or if they wanted to invest, we could put a more efficient system in, which is what we've done, and we provide the feedback then to them that it's costed them, this might save them that much, and so we do that across a number of areas, not just schools. We can do it. The automatic metering is on, for example, it's even on the pumping station in Harvard Road in Pontier, so I know exactly when the pump for the flood defences in Pontier are being geared up, and that's information that comes back, that can be used for other things. So we've got it down to the lowest in schools, as you say, we've got it there. But also we give access to schools to that data. I've been to a number of schools, demonstrated the data to them, given them the internet access to it, so they can actually go, the pupils, and use that data within what they want to do within the schools. So they can use it within any curriculum activity they might want to use it in, as well as monitoring. So it's there for them to use. I provide the link to that data to anybody who wants it. I request today from Torvine Leisure Trust, because we still collect the data, for example, from Cwmbran Stadium. So, when they've requested, can they have access to it? So I've given them access to it today. So it's there for everyone to use as they want it.
One question I do have, Alan, is unfortunately you're part-time employed. You're part-time yourself. What happens when you're not here to interpret the data for us? Because you have you got backup on all that? I mean, I have a fundamental question.
It is the structure.
I'm glad to hear that education are putting something in place for their estate. That sounds brilliant.
Yeah, and that'll benefit the authority, I would suggest, as well, without wishing to seem like I'm stealing a resource at the moment. The energy management function came over to us, and with that there was a vacant post carried. Now the idea is, and it has already started to happen, is Alan's knowledge gets shared across certainly Paul's section, which is the maintenance section. So there's a level of resilience there when Alan isn't in. And as part of the move over, we will be looking a bit longer term, given the pressures we have on budget, how we look to continue to ensure that we've got resilience across this. And certainly, colleagues in education, we work with regularly and we continue to work with. So perhaps not as much resilience as we'd like, but we've got to be conscious of where we are in terms of budget.
Are you going to be then having a virtual Alan in respect? It was a nice idea that, but because we well respect what it does in that sense. But are you going to be looking at having a teamwork approach there? It seems the obvious thing to suggest.
Certainly a teamwork approach, but in reality, Alan is a specialist energy officer, so we won't be able to backfill Alan's role with another member of, for example, Paul's team, because they simply won't have the opportunity to gain that knowledge. Similarly, vice versa, Alan wouldn't be able to get a property officer's knowledge. But we'd like to think that we could get to a place where the things that could cause us issues on a day-to-day basis, where Alan's officer on a Monday something goes wrong with one of the meters that we were talking about, and it flags up there's an issue, that we'd like to be able to deal with that. Other things then we'll obviously wait for Alan.
It does beg the question, because Alan's obviously got the skill to interpret most of this stuff, is if, for instance, if something drastic goes wrong on one of the sites, what happens at the dreaded weekend? You can probably pick that up. I don't know how you if something drastically goes wrong, what your emergency system is for that.
I mean, I wouldn't respond. Well, I wouldn't respond to it, obviously, on a weekend. If there was an alarm system in process, then we could have that to be able to set up to email or text numerous people, and for example in property services, it could be the property services duty officer, where there's obviously a duty officer on duty all weekend as well as in evening and night throughout the week. But it could, for example, just be calling the school head or the school caretaker. There's processes in there. Again, long term, there are companies out there who provide this service for monitoring, and they can do it. So.
Yeah, thanks. Because my current team covers the M&E guys. So we've got principal, we've got a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, and an assistant engineer. So those guys are well versed in emergency situations. So if something's gone wrong, there's burst water pipe, pumps fail, whatever, they can deal with that, and that's the correct avenue then for that to come through. I think what we're talking about here is if we have this automatic notification that something's happened, who would then pick it up? At the moment, we haven't got it. But if we did have it, I would see it primarily going to Alan, but then certainly going through our single point of call, which is our help desk, which is manned 24/7 through the year. Yeah, so we would have officers there to be able to pick things up like that. And we do now. We respond to quite a lot where we've had a lot of metal theft, copper pipe theft from some of our buildings. We've had water flooding out onto the pavement and so on. And that gets picked up generally by somebody passing by or somebody turning up there and finding this happened. That's the situation at the moment. What Alan's talking about and you asked about, I think, would enhance that then.
I'm getting conscious of the fact that data is obviously only as good as your response to it. This type of data. There's obviously medium and long-term data which you respond to in different ways, but this immediate data, you're saying the SRS acts as a point of contact on that. Or the help desk via SRS, yeah.
It would be it's our help desk. Yeah. It's the only internal property maintenance help desk, and that's what they're versed in dealing with is emergency situations. We've got frameworks with contractors, so we can get a response within 2 hours or same day, depending on the severity. So we've got that pretty well nailed down. And what I would see is if we had any automated response requirement, that would go to that section as well, because that's manned. So if Alan's not about, they know who the next person needs to go to. Yeah.
Anybody else on any of these questions? Bearing in mind you already asked some of these.
Yeah. The question here is how do we prioritise schools for energy reduction? But, I think I'd like to change that a little bit and just say, how do we prioritise buildings? And is there a particular type of building that we would prioritise before another?
Yeah, I'll fill in, but it's the high-use ones. Which ones are using the most, really? That's the ones we would look at first. Do you want to add a bit about the energy certs? Yeah.
You probably come across the old adage that you could usually get 80% of your savings from 20% of your buildings in most things. And again, it's looking at the buildings with high consumption trends, but also we look at performance indicators. For example, using in the buildings above 1,000 square metres, we will use the annual display energy certificate, which is rated A to G. That, when we've got buildings at the G lower end, we would want to bring them up to the average score, at least into our line of a D, if not better. So those are the buildings we would really look to target first, because by all indicators, they are the ones that are using more than you would expect to use. So that's...
Could I ask, though, is there any rating given to those establishments that provide for the vulnerable? And we've already mentioned Cranbridge School, for example, but might not come up on that league table.
Yes, we provide a we use a national benchmark, and there are something like 100 and odd national benchmarks for different types of buildings, from a prison to a public toilet. So we know in good practice across the UK, and there's over 10,000 municipal buildings have provided this data into the database to look at these sort of benchmarks. So we've got an idea, a good idea of what, for example, an office building of this type, for example, an office building, I would expect staff to use 7.5 cubic metres of water per year each. So when I'm looking at the water use for a building, I know that's my benchmark. And if I'm higher than that, why? Is there something else we're doing? And it could be, actually, we've got a catering facility providing Meals on Wheels service. So I would expect them to be using a bit more. So we do look at all the different anomalies, and there are separate benchmarks for different types of buildings, which include special needs schools.
You want me to ask what are the challenges faced in doing so? I mean,
Yeah, the challenges are the resource and the finance really to do that.
We seem to have answered most of our questions here. The only, we've done now for theme 5 as well, if members are okay with it. The only other bit on theme 5, which is an interesting one, was EC legislation on letting commercial property will require all commercial properties to have a rating of E or better from 2018. What is the resource capacity to carry this out? We've got obviously some commercial buildings in council. That's a question for you.
We have over 400 commercial properties.
How many?
Over 400.
Well, that's
commercial properties across the estate.
Yeah.
These will only come on new let. So obviously we have some that have been let for quite a long time and will not come up for re-let. Others do come up for re-let. It's having to meet, I suppose, that criteria when we get to that point. Because the commercial estate, obviously, I have an advantage that I've come from asset management, where we ran the commercial estate. So, and Paul obviously has been involved in the maintenance of the commercial estate. So we do know where there are areas of concern, and we do know areas where we've got no concern. Because over the years, we've had to provide energy performance certificates for any new letting anyway. But it's not been restricted to a band before. So we know from those previous energy performance certificates what areas of our estate are in a poor condition and what are not. So it gives us that warning.
can you ever see a position where under this change in legislation we actually say, no, it's cheaper not to let this building out than it is to alter it to make it more energy efficient?
That's something beyond my thing, but yes, one of the criteria within the legislation draft is it financially viable to do? And that is a view you have to take. That could then be a loss of an asset that we get income on. So potentially, yes, I could, but I couldn't really answer and say yes, because it's not within my area of expertise. But unemployment opportunities.
More on quite a few of the theme for on sort of the softer side. It's got how are all service areas involved in carbon management, and sort of involved. We talked about how schools are getting involved in understanding energy, etc. I mean, are we looking to do that with, not as intensively, but with all staff? I mean, have we got awareness posters up, that kind of thing? All service areas should be looking at, reducing.
Over the years, we've run a number of staff awareness training courses, primarily in eco building, shared, and they have been funded by the council, trade unions, and some of the services when there's been specific things. For example, we've presented awareness courses to some of the management courses that have been run for staff. We've run courses on a regular basis every quarter in the eco building. We haven't done any this year. That's because, again, it's down to resource side of it from my point of view. I do provide posters and information out to people who request them. There are a number of very committed individuals across the authority who will act as energy champions. We did have an energy champions network some years ago. That sort of slipped by the wayside. So that it's there, but not, shall I say, in a high-profile view. It's something that we wanted to start last year, was the similar programme that we did with schools, was to run a similar programme with staff. And we engaged with, for example, the communications team, who were looking at some of communications aspects of this, so we could have a themed sort of message to look at that sort of area.
Questions, members? Anything you would like to add, gentlemen, while you're at it? You look exhausted. It's a hot day today, I know that. Thank you very much indeed for coming. And interesting subject. I think something we obviously won't be hearing the last of, because it's a major budget area after employment. And thank you, again, for going round. It brought the subject to life as far as we were concerned. I certainly know what a ground air source pump is now. It's a large refrigerator going the other way. And it was very interesting to see that working. I love talking to engineers, as you well know. It was really interesting. Thank you very much indeed, anyway. Thank you, Alan. Good to see you again. Thank you. And David, thank you very much indeed. Brilliant.
I suppose the most basic one is that we do get round to having a policy.
Well, I think it's fundamental, isn't it?
Yeah, I popped that one down.
You were at that like a ferret, I thought. Brilliant. Excellent. I think...
it's updating itself, that's what it's... you know, we have we've got a date as imaginary as it possibly could be, of 6 months for that to come along. Legislation in this field does change very, very, very often. And I think that when we have this policy, or whatever we decide to call it, I think that we should be requesting that then to be updated, certainly annually, but I think in this case, at this, because it's so important, is that we should ask for it to be done 6 monthly. There's, as I say, the points that I made with regard to the school buildings are when we have new equipment in schools and then we find something's gone wrong with one or other of the parts, and then you can't get the parts. Or you can get them, but you've got to wait an inordinate amount of time for them to come. So I think, you know, things like this and everything, I think are very important. And I think that the point that's been made this afternoon quite well, and I think it should be further echoed, is that we shouldn't be ticking boxes. Somebody, somewhere or other on the planet, says it's a good idea to do this, and it may well be where they are, but it might not apply in this valley. So I think that that's another. I think that's a learning curve that everybody has gone through, quite frankly. But we now must be on top of that.
Your points you picked up, and then you put your stamp on them, if you like. Is that the way to do it?
So, yeah, I had the one of the strategic document, I think they called it. As a committee, would you want to see that before it goes into
Yes.
Yeah.
I've seen it, have we?
Okay. There was the issue of working with Jackie Rue to send out a briefing note to community centre committees to inform them of the assistance that is available to them and any guidance they may need.
Community halls.
Yeah.
Yeah, centres.
Yeah.
Can I also say...
They're losing a member of staff soon, yeah.
Yeah, and the point that I would make there as well, that because these are volunteers, etc., and may not, somehow, of course, may not be completely up to speed. It needs to be sent out in simple English that is understandable. Some of these sort of statements that are made, a professional myself, I was looking at one yesterday and I thought, what the hell are they talking about? So I think it's important that that it's done fairly simply, if, in as many cases as it possibly can be.
Just going on from there, I think too, there's the fact that some of the halls have multi-users and multi-leases at the moment from Torvine. Yeah. So there needs to be some joined-up thinking in terms of that, especially, so that people understand the needs of each other as much as anything.
That's exactly what we were dealing with yesterday. Users.
We can also come back to the fact that you have one person in charge of it who's authorised for whoever's managing that hall, not who thinks they're managing that hall, because that's the point you were making earlier.
I don't know whether you wanted as a committee to endorse the proposal to appoint the energy officer for schools, because at the moment that's just a proposal at the moment. So
that's absolutely brilliant. My major concern was that Alan, part-time, has got the whole loading of this, and we need to endorse a teamwork approach there, and they suggested that, but it needs a very strong recommendation from this committee that they have a team of people working with this, and cross-discipline, cross-education, and that is recognised as energy management across the authority. Can we tell you strongly about that?
Very strongly, and I think we need to set a time frame for that as well.
That's a very strong recommendation.
Again, Chair, I would add the following. The key thing here is that all of the users have got to be very clear and on board. And I start with the governing bodies. They must understand and be a part of all of the decision making, but it's got to be joined up thinking. It's no good having an energy situation in school one and the other schools don't have it or don't agree with it. That's a total waste of time, because it's a waste of officer time, and I think that it's so important. I actually applaud whose ever idea it was at that level to engage a specific person within education, given it's probably our largest or certainly the most expensive portfolio that we've got for property with all the schools, particularly the new ones coming on board.
It's an idea coming from the school forum itself, so hopefully they will feel that they've got ownership of this and they will go for the collaborative working.
We point out this is the second biggest item on the school budget after personnel. And it's something they need to have control of, because that visit, they didn't know what it was.
Going on from there, when there is introduction of new technology, I think it's very important, particularly in the schools, that it's understood what impact that will have. I'm thinking of the SRS, the introduction of the new computers and so on. That had, in fact, a much greater impact on electrical supplies to schools than was perhaps realised, and the extra work that needed to go on.
There's a couple of...
Right, so I'll get those all typed up and sent to you tomorrow.
Can we just say the recommendations in terms of, one, the control and training of people, and then the other part of it was trying to get my head around it. Did you have those bits there? Because there were several bits in that one. The control of energy management. There was also the novel aspect which you mentioned.
Yeah, I think the point is, and having had the experience elsewhere, it is very important indeed that there is a clear who is responsible for something, particularly in schools, at each school. And instruction and training isn't so much of an issue because you have to instruct and train the people how to use the equipment. But I think my experience showed in another place of employment that there was, in the first instance, plenty of activity and involvement. And then it went off on the wane, and that was when the problem started to arise, when people forgot, if you like, what it was they needed to do. And of course, all of this is about the saving of energy, is something which is based over a period of time. You don't get an immediate fix on it. So I think it's important that we put that extra effort in. This new appointment will go a long way to doing that, and feel very confident.
I also thought there was another issue here which they were addressing, but we need to be clear about, was about novel ideas like ground source pumps, solar voltaics, etc., etc. We've had history in the past about people putting things in which needs to have an agreement about who puts what in where. Trying to get to the depth of that, it's not always the most novel thing. Alan says a very clear idea about control systems and some simple solutions being better than what he called green bling. And you're very hard on that one as well, aren't you?
Well, again, the point was well made by the officers that you can put in a rainwater harvesting system, and it's absolutely wonderful. And then at a later date, it suddenly dawns on somebody that it's costing a fortune to pump this stuff around. So really, at the end of the day, the amount of saving generated has been taken up somewhere else in the use of other energies in order to pump it around the building.
Coming in on the back of that, really, I remember going to one of these estates where they had these wonderful houses, absolutely no energy, virtually no energy needed to heat it at all, and state-of-the-art stuff. And we went there in July, every single window was open. And the reason they did that was because it was so bloody hot in the summer that they actually had to install air conditioning in there. And they didn't want to run the air conditioning because it was too expensive. It was even more expensive to run the air conditioning to keep it cool than it was per month to keep it warm in the winter. But I think I would like, perhaps, and this is a bit of an odd one really, but I would like us to draw attention to the Executive Member for Resources about the issues that came up about sort of the overall thing about the capital funding for 21st century schools being reduced, how they're looking for a unit cost that will impact upon new builds. Yeah. Also the fact that the funds, the loan funds, are diminishing. And I think, I think we do need to make something to the executive member to sort of say, well, during these times of austerity, it is, and I don't wish that to be political, but during these times of cutbacks, if you like, let's not call it anything political, that it's going to be more difficult to implement some of these carbon-saving ideas. And then, if we,
the regulations, aren't they?
Well, yeah, I know, but this is it, isn't it? I mean, I've got some real concerns here about the Environment Bill and the Future Generations and Wellbeing Bill, about how we're going to afford to enforce them.
There'll be a budget of it. Yeah, but there has to be a budget for us to afford it, and that was one of the discussions that was had in the Welsh Government.
I think there will. I think there may be a budget.
No, it has to be.
Is it going to be a sufficient budget? That's the issue, isn't it? And it isn't. And will it be a budget that simply money taken from this pot and this bit and said, oh, there's your energy efficiency budget, but we've taken it out of here and here that you're not getting anyway?
That is an administrative question, not a political question in a lot of it, because it's the cost of putting that in place. It has to be there, and this is fundamental what you're asking, because if you put these new resources, you put these new measures in place, this is fundamental.
I am 100% convinced that this EU legislation on commercial properties won't be funded. That won't be funded.
Can I make a point, Chair, as well? Because it's an important point that Glyn has made with regard to 21st century schools. You see, we've built some 21st century schools, and the way that we're beginning to see things going forward, some of the schools which have the aspirations to modernise and to have what will be 21st century schools are not going to get them at this rate, because the more they keep, you see, they've introduced 21st century schools as a system, and then they've turned round and started to cut that budget, which is, for me, absolutely ludicrous, because we're going to get to a stage where we're going to have extremely good, well-constructed schools, and we're going to land up with some which are of an age costing a fortune to run. And the thing about it is, this is the question, where does the burden then fall for those schools that may not have been improved? Why should the burden fall on the people that are responsible for those schools when others have had new schools? And that's the bit that's worried me all of the time, quite frankly. And I thought, well, somebody's going to be right at the end of the queue here, and somebody has to be at the end of the queue. And I think we're all agreed that the 21st schools has dropped back a little bit, but we can't really afford for it. And I think that this is something, as you said, as Glyn said about the executive member, really needs to be on top of this, because it is so, both executive members, both for learning and for resources, because it's very much in the face of all other people that we represent.
Well, I picked up specifically on resources because this is an issue around energy saving, and as a consequence, it is a, although not a totally financial matter, it is about sustaining the planet in its entirety. It is also an issue around saving money for schools, and for this local authority, and for community groups.
Just that, given that, perhaps that puts even more pressure on the need for the different authorities to work together.
Jess?
I'd just like to see us endorse, the staff awareness side. In particular, I mean, like you said there, 75% saving for putting LEDs up in year, but if we had that coming out from staff, I mean, even in a community hall, if you put LEDs in and you can save, a lot, we really need to push that.
The one item we did say, and I did make a point about it, was children as energy ambassadors. As part of, I just think they're brilliant at it. Can we put that recommendation in as well? There's a nice soft one in there at the end. And they do it as part of their, I mean, they do it when you do Cumbrian Community Council's environmental quiz. They know it better than us, don't they, Steve?
They did. They knew the answers.
They didn't.
We didn't know them.
No, so they make good ambassadors, and they're the future generation.
I
so that's in. Go on.
I think as well a little publicity about how much energy we have saved by putting those LED, not just here but in other buildings. How much the total council's energy consumption has gone down over the last 3 years?
Could we have that information, please, and get it publicised through our usual channels, and get that one out as a press release, if we could, please? Thank you. And it would be useful to encourage everybody at large to consider that, because it is quite a valuable saving. And I'm sure Alan would be quite happy to make a comment on that, because he's really good at that. Thank you, everybody. We've now got the next bit on the agenda. You're not off yet. We've got about 10 minutes of this. Well, I know we have a nice word with somebody. We'll make it out there. Right, discussion of item for next meeting. What's the...
We have visioning next Thursday afternoon, so you will discuss your work programme, the potential items that you would like to take forward over the next 12 months. So I will send you out some paperwork next week, detail in the potential items.
Yeah, just We need to be, if you like, perhaps the chair and our office staff here, that we are guided on where we need to be going, because I think it all needs to be specific, doesn't it, as to what we're going to do.
But if you've got, can I make a bit about?
If I can just come in there, we have during the informal meeting with chairs, we've streamlined the process now. So it's literally a table detailing the potential items, what feeders have fed to that item, and then the chief officers will come along on the day and advise you. And then you can ascertain what scrutiny activity you can take from that.
An invitation's gone out to the public to suggest items as well, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
That should be interesting to see what they make of this. All right, summary of executive decision for review, page 45, if I can find it. It's actually on page 43 on mine. So, okay, page 43, page 44, and page 45. Any comments on any of this?
Well, the decisions is on page 47.
Oh, well, sorry about that.
That's their all through 47.
Sorry about this, but I get caught out by this lot. So, would you like to make comments on that, Glenn? No, good. Someone would like to recommend approval? Thank you, Sue. And a second? Brilliant, excellent. Oh, there's some more on the other side here. 48, 49, 50 and 51, yeah. And small schemes on the other side. So that's 53, 54, I have to say this, 55, 56, 57, 58. I can think we can take all members are in there. Yeah, go on.
This is not a no, this is last year, isn't it?
Last year, yeah.
Anyway, come on, mate. I declare an interest because my name's printed.
Right, okay, that's good, out of the way. So next date, have we got, date of next meeting is next week, isn't it?
Yep.
Right, summary of exempt decisions. Can you turn the thing off, please?
Thank you.
Okay.